Hey everybody, this is Lisa Reherrick, host of the RFP Success Show and founder of the RFP Success Company. So today I'm welcoming guest Chantel Gibbons, who's going to talk to us about federal contracting. So both refreshing and inspiring, Chantel Gibbons presents simple strategies that educate and break through the complex, and complex it is, federal government acquisition process. As the creator of GovSuccess and through her company, We Do Contracts, various programs and events, Chantel equips business owners with the ability to successfully create and develop their own custom blueprint to successfully growing their business with government contracts. Chantel is a career expert, author, and GovSuccess mentor. And it is so great to have Chantel here with us today because, you know what, I don't play at all in the federal space. I stick to what I know is state, local, and corporate, and federal is pretty daunting to me. And like she says, it can be really complex. So I'm seriously looking forward to learning a ton. So Chantel, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to talk to you. Like I said, I stay away from federal because it's really daunting. I've played very, very little in it. And at the time it was like, what are all these requirements? This is crazy. So before we get really into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I have over 25 years of business and government contract experience, specifically in the federal area. I started off as a financial analyst on a big contract at a local Air Force base in Georgia, and nobody understood the contract, and I was a finance person, so I just kind of fell into this contract role that they promoted me to, and I just kind of took off from there. So I just really have this love and passion for the federal side that people just have nightmares about. So I guess I have my nice little niche in
Yeah,
the world.
absolutely. It's a good thing that everybody has their love for things that other people hate, right? Because I think the same thing with RFPs. People are like, "What? Why do you love RFPs?" And I'm like, "I do," you know. So it's good that you love it because the rest of us do not want to love it, and you can love it for us. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to start off with a big question. But what is the secret sauce to getting contracts with the federal government?
I truly believe that it's experience and relationships. I think those are the two key things. And when you put them perfectly together with somebody who knows what they're doing in that space of awesome, whether it's a service or a product, and you have that um, experience and oh my gosh, I just went blank.
It's okay. Stop. Tim, can you go back just a few seconds and edit that out? Do you want me to re-ask the question?
Yeah, because I completely forgot what I said. I said
Okay.
experience and something else.
Okay. So Tim, if you can go back and cut this right before I ask the same question that I'm getting ready to ask again. Right. Are you good? Are you ready for
Yeah.
just relax. Just pretend you're talking to me like last time.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to kick this off with a big question, which is, what is the secret sauce to getting federal contracts?
So I really think it's a great blend of experience in a certain area and having the right relationships with the right people in the government. Those two combined perfectly together give you a great opening to be able to expand into the federal world. It's a little tricky, but that is the perfect mix, that perfect blend.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting, Chantel, when you and I talked the first time, because I just met you pretty recently, and we
Sure.
had this really great conversation. And one of the things that you told me is that you have this philosophy to not bid on RFPs. You prefer for your clients to not bid on RFPs. Can you expand more on what you mean by that?
Sure. I believe that the relationship part of that allows for you to build that rapport, almost dating the government, as you will, is what I call my program,
I love that.
in order for that commitment between the buyer from the government side and that person that's trying to obtain that work from that government entity. If you are not aware, the government has thousands and thousands of agencies and departments within
Yeah.
those agencies, and each of those agencies and most of the departments have their own buyers. That's a lot of people that you can build a relationship with, and they're not all in just DC, or they're not all in just San Diego. They're all over the United States. So regardless of where a business owner is located, they can have a relationship with somebody local, whether it's the post office, Department of Labor, Department of Defense. There's a lot of areas, a lot of different buyers in all the different agencies across the US.
And I'm a huge proponent of relationship building, right? Like even on the RFP, on the state, local, corporate RFP side, I'm like, if you're bidding on something cold, you're going to lose, right? It's all about those relationships.
It's hard.
Yeah, but don't you hear from people all the time that say, yeah, but you can't build relationships with buyers in the federal government. Nobody wants to talk to me. I can't get to them. What would you say to people that make that argument?
If you're not already registered with the government as a vendor, which is it's free to register yourself. If you use an expert like me, then of course you need to pay for that service. But if you're registered and have an identifier with the government, which is called a CAGE code, CAGE code,
Ooh, cool.
then you can identify yourself as, hey, I'm so and so with this company, my CAGE code number is blank blank blank, just trying to see if there's any needs that you might have, trying to build that relationship. The steps that I actually use are prepare relationship, start the relationship, and then actually build in that relationship. And so I think there's many steps you have to do before you just jump in to kind of get those waters going, to take it from cold to warm.
Right, and that's not going to happen overnight.
No.
Like people love to think, well, oh, it's a government contract, I can just win this and bid and win. And no, it's a long game, wouldn't you say?
It can be. It sometimes smaller towns are easier to build that rapport. Larger cities may be a little more difficult, more competition, but it's definitely not a fast process. But anything that's great typically takes time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you said something there a second ago that I want to go back to also, which was we can go out and do this on our own,
Yes.
right? And do all of that. What's the benefit to using somebody like you to register for us?
So there are over 600,000 contractors. The government calls vendors
Ouch.
contractors, listed in the SAM system, System of Award Management. So that's sam.gov. You have to be registered in that system. Out of those 600,000, there was a report done by Georgia Tech a couple of years ago that said over 20% of the people who are registered are incorrectly registered. They have
Really?
errors, they have problems, they've certified incorrectly. So if the government can't see you or can't confirm what you're capable of doing, because your capabilities are also listed in the system,
Yeah.
then you're not really existing. So you cannot win an award with the federal government unless you are registered in at least that one system.
You know what? That's such a great point, because even the NAICS codes that we have to identify, I mean, I look at them, and I was just having this conversation this morning with a bunch of people, and we were like, I don't know what, it feels like it should be so cut and dry, but it's not.
It's
And
not.
so, you kind of pick something and you hope that's right. And what I hear you saying is that when you're looking for those categories in the cage, for the cage codes, you want to make sure it's right, or you could get overlooked and waste time and
Yeah.
money.
And a lot of people think they just have to pick one. The big players in the game, they have 50, 60 different capabilities because they do so much.
Mm.
So if, for example, if you're a cleaning service, you do commercial cleaning for a company. So you're a janitorial service, but can you do carpets too? Do you do tile? How do you handle, waste management? Is there other capabilities that surround your niche that can help you expand your capabilities in those areas? And that's what we do as part of step one of my 5-phase process called Gov Success. So that step one is that whole assessment and capabilities and analyzation for really see whether or not you have all the capabilities you can do based on your financial capabilities, how far you can spread your area of responsibility. Can you only stick in Phoenix? Can you only stick in Las Vegas? Or do you have the financial backing and relationships with other people to have a larger playground?
Wow, this is so cool. Like I knew I was going to learn a ton. I mean, we've been on the phone for like, 7 minutes, or on the podcast for 7 minutes, and I've already learned a whole bunch, because I think we do, especially small businesses. Like I'm just going to jump in and figure this out myself, but I'm already seeing the value in why I would bring somebody in like you to help me with that.
Right, right.
Because it can be so complex. And then um because there's certifications too, right? Like the 8A, and I don't even know what the rest of them are. Can you talk a little bit about the federal certifications and when again, another big question, when do we know it's time to go get a certification like 8A or FABS or GSA schedule, or I don't even know the difference between all those?
Sure. So a certification with the Small Business Administration would be more around women-owned, veteran-owned, uh, service-disabled veteran-owned, those kind of, there's Hub Zone, which is more of a low-income area. If your office is located there, then you can have that certification. Some of those are self-certifying with the SBA, women-owned and
Yep.
so you can actually go in there and do that. If you want to have the official certification, there's an application process. You do not have to be a certified vendor like that in order for you to sell to the government. You don't have to be.
What about the 8A? Because I hear a lot about the 8A because that's a specific federal certification, right?
Right. Yeah. So the 8A is a mentor protege kind of program, so where you become eligible. It's a 10-year program. You can only have it one time in your life. So if you switch companies or start another company, you can never have but one 8A in your lifetime.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow. So
very
it's
limited.
attached to a person, not attached to a company?
Yes.
Oh,
You go
really?
through a fingerprinting process and everything. So I had to submit my
Interesting.
fingerprints and everything to the SBA. Um, so when you have that, you become eligible for more subcontracts or more prime contracts. And you can also be a part of a mentor protege program to where they pair you up with a prime contractor. So one of the big boys, it may not be Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or something like that, but you'll be with a more experienced prime contractor within that program of the 8A.
Interesting. And actually, that brings up another question is, so what if you're a small business and you're like, I really want to do work with the federal government, but it feels so daunting. And I know we talked about, you already mentioned, go to a smaller city, something that's a little bit smaller, but there's also that opportunity to work with prime contractors as a
Absolutely.
subcontractor. And when should somebody look at that avenue versus going at it to become the prime? And actually, if you could, even just because we might have some callers or listeners on the phone that don't even really understand what we mean when we say prime or sub. So if you could even go back to basics there as you answer that.
Sure. So going back to basics like contracts 101, a prime contractor is considered the entity, the company that has the contract with the government itself. So whoever the first layer underneath the government is the prime. Anybody that they award to underneath that one contract is considered the subcontractor. So that would be like the second tier, and then you can have a third tier and fourth tier, depending on how many tiers you can or are allowed to do within that contract. Some contracts do not allow so many levels and some
Yeah.
do. Um,
Okay.
but to start as a subcontractor, the more experience you have, the better opportunities you have. But
Yeah.
in general, the government themselves like somebody who has 2 to 3 years of experience before they go after their first prime contract.
Oh,
But we've seen them earlier than that, and you don't have to be certified to do that. But if you want that small business designation for a contract, then you need to have those certifications. And the reason that's important is because in 2017, the government, I think, awarded almost 4 million contracts, different contracts, 4 million different
wow.
contracts. Of that 4 million, about 1.7 million were awarded to small and minority owned businesses.
Oh, that's cool. I did
That's
not
a
know
lot,
that.
yeah.
That's a lot. That's a great statistic.
But the total amount of all the contracts was around $508 billion for all those contracts. And about 141 billion were awarded to small and minority businesses. Um,
Okay.
the government, the federal side, is required to award at least 23% of
Mm.
all their budget to small businesses. So if their budget is 500 million or 500 billion, then that's 115 billion dollars that's available to small business.
That is pretty amazing. And that's something that's different from state and local. State, local, corporate, they don't have that necessarily. Some of them do, but most, it's not like a blanket mandate like the federal government has. So
Right.
that's pretty cool for small businesses.
So out of those numbers I gave you, that $4 million for the amount of 4 million contracts,
Contracts.
and then the 1.7 to small business, that was around, I think, 43%. somewhere around there. And then
Wow.
28% of the budget was awarded. So they actually did 5% more last year than they did in 2000, they did 5% more than required in 2017.
That's very cool. That's really encouraging. I love
Yeah.
to see those numbers.
Yeah, so that's why the small business designations are important, because the contracts are proposed in that way. And so if you're woman owned and that contract's for woman owned, you have a better chance of getting it. When people don't apply to those contracts or solicit for those contracts, again, put a proposal in for that contract or
Yep.
something, then that's when they go to the big boys to get that contract awarded.
Ah, interesting.
So,
So if I come to you and I say, hey, I'm a small business, I've never worked with the federal government, I need help. That's something like that is what I can come to you with, right? Like, hey,
yeah.
Chantel, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then you would help me figure out if I should be a sub, where I might be able to, what kind of contracts I should go after, where I should start building relationships. Does that give a good idea of what you do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll look at your capabilities and analyze what you're doing internally. See if you've met all your capabilities, you have all the right designations you need to in your registration. If you're not registered, you have to be. So, there's step 1, 2, 3, kind of help you get through that. Typically, for registration with the government, we are pretty proud to say we do it less than 14 days. It's pretty daunting.
Wow.
People have said it's taken them months to get through the process. We've pretty much mastered it. About 2 months ago, the government changed some rules. So now there's a notarized letter that has to be submitted to the government now, which has slowed down the process. So about 30 to 45 days is now the new process.
Interesting. So do you work with just small businesses or anything? Like if there's a corporation that needs help, you'll work with them too?
Yeah, I do. I actually provide contract management support to corporations, as well as small subcontractor management for them, and help
Wow.
them. A supply chain can have hundreds of subcontractors underneath them, or vendor suppliers. And each of those vendors and suppliers, if that company is a government contractor, needs to be registered with the government too. They have to flow down the requirements of contracts to the other suppliers, and that includes the registration process.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, gosh, I wish I had known about you. Like, I don't know how many years ago it was. I was trying to put together that FABS, which I don't even think it
Schedule.
exists anymore. I don't know if it still exists or if it's under GSA, but yeah, we had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah, those are schedules. Those are actual contracts. They're usually 5 to 10 years, or 5 years and repeat for another five
Yeah.
years. And they're schedules. I call them pay to play, because you end up paying quarterly fees to the government in order for you to utilize it. So I'm not a huge fan of GSA schedules. They're a great source of giving people an avenue to buy in the government, and to negotiate prices and have set things. So they're beneficial. I just think they're kind of dated for 2018.
And there are some agencies federal that require that though,
Yes.
right? So what do we mean when we're talking about a schedule? So let's just talk about that a little bit, because I brought it up and now people are probably like, what are you talking about? What does it mean? What is a schedule? The GSA
So,
schedule and that.
right. So usually in a schedule, you'll have a fixed rate of cost per year. So for example, this is 2018. Say you were awarded a 5-year GSA schedule for FABs, or for office management, or engineering services. You'll have labor categories listed, and you'll have 5 years, and there'll be rates. That's considered your schedule. And so people can inquire to you to get a quote for services they may need randomly throughout the year, which would then be based on the labor category and the year that you're in. And
Okay.
that'll be the pricing that's utilized. It's basically to derive the pricing in the maybe the parts that you might have available if you're a product type entity,
Yep.
or different types of services you may have: administrative services, contract management services, that kind of stuff.
Okay. So it's almost like a pre-approval that other agencies can use to go find companies that are
Absolutely.
pre-approved.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
and your NICS codes are in there, and all that kind of stuff's all tied into it, so they can do a search within the GSA e-library in order to find the people they're looking for to solicit. They can mass email a bunch of different people based on that
Interesting.
information.
Well, if we just confused all the listeners, just call Chantel. She'll help you figure.
Just
She'll help you figure it all out. All right. So, what is the difference? And this is just funny because you and I are on completely different sides, right? But what would you say the big difference is in going after federal business versus state and local?
I think state and local is just state and local. That's where the work's at. The federal side, I could have a contract that's in California and I have a contract for the same thing in Florida. The
Mhm.
federal side is, a broad branch of everything. There's a lot more restrictions in the federal side. There's a lot more regulations, and I think that's why people are scared of it. But when you have somebody on your team, like myself or anybody you might hire who has that expertise in-house, you kind of get through those little hurdles or the red tape, so we say,
Yeah.
pretty easy. Um, the,
Ooh, we like that.
the biggest thing is like the FAR regulations, the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR. Those are the terms and conditions of your contract. And then you have your scope and have what you negotiate. But that's how it works. I think the biggest daunting thing is a lot of small businesses see these regulations that come down and they think they have to accept them, and they don't. Small businesses can exempt out of so much that they don't even know about.
Really?
That's one of the reasons why they push away, because they don't understand why they have to do this and this and this. But the government flows down regulations based on the type of contract. So whether it's a fixed price, cost plus,
Yep.
whatever the setup, and then also the scope. So if it's the engineering services, like a professional service,
Yep.
is it for maintenance or research? What kind of scope is it? So those are the kind of things that determine what regulations are flowed down, and it's the responsibility of the small business to kick back what's not required or take exception to those items.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm making faces over here, by the way, you guys, because as soon as she says regulations, I know me, I just am like, that's daunting to me, and I'm sure it's daunting to a lot of listeners. And so this is such a cool conversation because you know your stuff, you're so comfortable with it. It,
Right.
it feels like this huge thing to overcome. And I think you're right. I think people shy away from it because it's so big and daunting. And no, people are busy. We don't have time to
Right.
figure this stuff out. So, all right. What would be your top advice for somebody who wants to get into the federal space?
Take your time. Do it right.
Oh, that's good, right? Because we think, oh, we got to do it quickly. We got to do it overnight because we want business. We all start getting a little bit desperate. Take your time and do it right. All
I
right.
actually had just a little story real quick. I actually
Yeah.
had a client years ago who had a sister who just happened to work in a warehouse on base. She was a material handler, so she moved boxes from one place to another. And that was enough experience for him to have her register his company with the government. He actually was fined for certifying incorrectly, because he had certified he had so much money and this and that, and
Wow.
he actually was fined. I think it was only $25,000, but if you're a small business, that's a lot of
It's a
money.
lot of money, yeah. And
Corporate
what
life might bark, like, oh, no big deal.
yeah,
But a small business, it's important of who you deal with to help register your company, your expertise. And then the ones who want to do it by themselves and they don't have experience in the government world, time is money. So if
yeah.
you're not in your space of awesome, then you need to find somebody else who can do it for you better.
Yeah, I agree. And at the beginning of our conversation, you made that very clear that like just get some help wherever it be, whether it's call you or hire somebody that knows what they're doing, because it's so
Right.
much easier for you guys versus us that would be like 18 times harder, 18,000 times harder actually,
Right.
really. So what are some of the pitfalls that people need to look out for when it comes to contracting with the federal government?
It's not easy. It's not going to just fall in your lap. People register sometimes correctly, sometimes incorrectly, and they just think their phone's going to be ringing off the hook. That's
Yeah.
not how it works. You need to kind of do your own legwork and find those opportunities. And my company actually has that a part of our program. Not only the capabilities and registration, but kind of telling you who your customers are in your area. Based on what we analyze for you, how far can you reach? Here's other customers in that have the need. I use commercial cleaning a lot as a good example, because I think everyone can relate to those concepts pretty easy and transfer
Yep.
them into their own entity. But uh, if a commercial cleaner just looks, the, the post office needs cleaning, Some of the
Mhm.
school places are federal owned. Um,
Everything.
every federal touched thing needs maintenance, and they don't do it themselves. They outsource it. There's a lot of
Wow.
opportunities out there.
So how would somebody know if their service is needed in the federal government
So the
or
government
product?
has, yeah. Well, I actually have a freebie for your team,
Yay.
for your listeners, called Needs of the Government. It gives you a list of the high level of products if you're a product-based company, and then a high level of services. And there's a lot of subcategories underneath those, but it kind of gives
Yep.
you a good product versus service type items to kind of help people identify whether or not they have something that the government kind of needs. Um,
Yeah, because I do have a lot of clients that'll come to me and ask me that question, like, "Hey, how do I even know, who needs my services?" And they ask that on the state and local side too, right? But on the federal side, it feels so daunting. I keep using that word, right? But it feels so
right.
daunting to try to figure that out. So, by the way, all the listeners, in the show notes, there will be a link to that you can get that download that Chantel just mentioned. So you can kind of start your search there if you don't already know. I do know that, I work with a lot of consulting firms, and that's such a nebulous um, offering. Is it easy to figure out what kind of consulting firms the federal government is looking for?
Um,
Easy is a dumb word probably to use.
They have different categories. So they'll have
Okay.
like management and consulting is actually one specific group itself, but
Okay.
there could be subcategories of that, laborers consulting concept. Maybe there's an energy consultant. So there's a lot of different consultants we have in this world that can fit into one category. But the government has a solicitation website called the Federal Business Opportunities website. It's
Okay.
FBO, so Frank Bravo Oscar.gov, and that's where the government lists their opportunities for most of the work.
Interesting. Well, this has been very enlightening, Chantel. Like I knew I was going to learn a whole ton, and I'm sure my listeners are too. So thank you so much. Tell
You're
us how
welcome.
folks can get in touch with you if they'd like to explore more about federal contracting with you directly.
Sure. My email from my office, a member of my team can reach out to you, is info@wedocontracts.com. We also have a sign up page for contacting us on our website, which is also wedocontracts.com.
Okay.
And those are the best places to reach out to us to get a hold of us.
Yay, perfect. So info@wedocontracts.com and wedocontracts.com. And
Correct.
that'll be in the show notes along with the link to get the handout that Chantel mentioned. Anything else, Chantel, that you want to share with our listeners about federal contracting? Do you think we've covered it all? Anything I've missed?
It's a great way for a commercial business to expand their revenue streams. It really is. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, and have it be a long-term strategy, right?
It can be. The government's
Yep.
required to pay you at net 30. People
Ooh.
think they don't pay on time, but net 30 is required. And each of those buyers that I said had buying capabilities across
Mhm.
the U.S. They can award contracts up to 150,000. The government just updated it in April to 250,000. So that one
Wow.
buyer that you're trying to build a relationship to can just execute contracts with $250,000. 5 of those
Oh.
contracts equals $1 million. It's pretty fast to get $1 million as a small business.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great thing for the small businesses listening
Yeah,
in. So wonderful. Chantel,
thank
thank you
you.
so much for being here. I really appreciate your insights.
I appreciate your time. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. All right. So, everybody, make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you do not miss an episode. And we will be back again next week. This is Lisa Reherrick signing off.